we're really excited to get into a bit of a spicy topic about women in AI today. So we're definitely going to name check folks that you need to add to your follow list on whatever platform you're on. But we want to talk about the difference between what we're going to call Girlboss AI, or kind of this uncritical adoption only approach, versus a slightly more nuanced critical approach that still lets people engage with AI in a way that makes sense for them. So a bit of a deeper conversation, but what we hope is, one, women get something about how they can show up in this, but also men kind of get a peek into what it's like to be on maybe a more marginalized side of this while trying to navigate some really tough questions.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
All right. I'm so excited to talk about this, and I've come up with a bit of like a kitschy name for it, which is, I want to talk about the difference between Girlboss AI and Babes AI. and what I mean by that is that I think a lot of conversations are getting tangled up together, and so I think it's important, especially given the grounding of like what we're trying to do, is to talk about different types of feminism and how they're showing up in AI, and really naming that this is the newest iteration of something that has happened a lot. So with that, I will frame some things. So Tressie M. Cottom wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, kind of saying like the girl bosses have come for AI, and it created this stir, certainly here in Australia, but globally, and basically calling out a very particular strain of like women advocating for AI adoption. Mm-hmm. And what I found really frustrating was it got turned into this like AI versus not AI. And I think there's actually a conversation in the middle that's worth having mm-hmm. about the way we as women try to show up in this conversation and maybe offer a slightly different model than what Tressie was trying to critique. So to start, can you kind of talk about what happened with Reese Witherspoon and a couple of other people recently, and just like give me your thoughts on why it was maybe useful, even though there was a quite spicy internet moment?
Okay, so Reese Witherspoon came out and was discussing, I think inside an Instagram post, not quite sure on the exact platform, but I'm pretty sure it was Instagram. I think it was Insta. And she was saying that it's really important for women particularly, to get more involved in AI. I kind of honestly thought it was a bit of an innocuous post, but obviously Reese Witherspoon has a massive platform. Not only is she an actress, but she has this whole publishing arm underneath her as well. So she was basically saying women need to become more involved inside the AI conversation, otherwise they're going to get left behind. Now, there was a massive backlash against this. Particularly from women saying that they are purposefully opting out and that there wasn't enough consideration. Like women are opting out of this because of their ethical concerns regarding AI, that they are either, don't believe inside systems that have been built on stolen text, or that they've got issues with like the whole gamut of the issues that we always talk about with AI implementation. But I suppose what I found quite interesting in that reaction was I felt that in that moment, I really did feel that Reese Witherspoon was, and whilst I'm not a Reese Witherspoon fan at all, she was assuming that people would kind of take it as a very low tier kind of conversation. Totally. And I don't think what she was saying was inherently wrong. Right? I don't think that in terms of, okay, more women need to be involved inside AI because this AI thing is running down the rails, and the more that we opt out, the less involved we are. And so these are decisions that we've made. Like, we obviously know and consider the ethical concerns of AI as we deal with it, and we work in that grey. And I think that's an important thing. It's not just about blind adoption, and maybe that was the nuance that she was missing.
So I think that's it, because I agree with you. If you go back and actually do look at the Insta post, what she's saying is like quite down the middle in terms of what kind of mainstream AI discourse is. But what I think happened is the timing coincided with these AI elites basically pushing this narrative of you have to adopt it, all the jobs are going away, and people are so angry at that like they dumped that on her. And again, of course, it's on the women instead of the men running the labs.
Yeah, of course.
But there's a lot of folks who, some of them are economically benefiting from pretending like those of us with principled critiques are anti. And so I think that's the middle area where you and I live, is that, I want to help do this well. And it goes back to something that we see a lot. So I'm not assuming that folks know about this, but in kind of the critical theory discourse, the girl boss is kind of the like white feminism version, which is the most kind of mainstream feminism. It tends to be concerned with like individual productivity or achievement inside these kind of broken systems. And the types of solutions it comes up with tend to really only benefit white women. So I've been doing DEI in tech for over a decade, and the data from the US showed that like, you know, in 2014, when Google put out their diversity report, everybody kind of followed suit. It was like, oh, diversity. If you look at the numbers, white women advanced and women of color fell behind, and actually their numbers dropped.
Yeah.
And so part of like the critique that's coming of this is this AI adoption kind of white feminism, girl boss ethos is the next version of that. But there are other options. And I think that's what we should talk about.
And I think we should really learn from the fallout that happened with Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In and what that actually meant, because ultimately that was like a phenomenon moment of you know, okay, like women moving forward, but it was only inclusive of a very small cohort of women. And I think that it actually ingrained those gender biases even further, because it's like, okay, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get a quarter of the way there. And it's it's something that I find very interesting, because particularly millennial women, I just don't know, you know, the discourse around Gen Z enough to kind of be like, it's the same thing. But for millennial women, I think we're just really tired of holding all the pieces in our hands and then taking on the systemic problems that are happening inside an organization or happening inside society, and like having to hold all those things and then also be like told, oh, the reason why you're not getting ahead is because you aren't being, you know, you've got imposter syndrome or you've not got the confidence to be able to interrogate stuff. And it drives me bonkers.
It's, I think kind of like the girl boss energy is so individualized in that it feeds into that. It's like, oh, if you just work hard enough, if you just achieve enough, you can overcome all of the structural cards that are against you. And one, like, I actually think even for white women, it lets them down.
Yeah.
Like, so I think it's just not a good framework. But the other option I want to present is, you know, using $17 words, it's like intersectional feminism. So feminism that considers the other kind of marginalizations that someone might experience. You know, for me, I'm disabled, I'm queer, I'm, you know, mixed race Latina. So that's always been really present for me. But I want to note that, like, you always talk about like kind of assume positive intent or people are doing their best. And I think they are, but that's why I wanted to have this is like, there's a different model of feminism that can empower women. But to me, the biggest shift is two things. One, leaning into that ethical critique as a guardrail. And I think Bo-Young Lee, who's the CEO of AI for All, has written really well about women's kind of principled non-adoption. But then also rooting our solutions not in individual productivity, but in community care and well-being. Yeah. Because the reality is like, we still have all these pieces, but if we hold them together, in all of the work I've done, we leave less people behind when we choose this option versus that option. That's what I offer to folks is like, that's a term to Google and we'll put a reading list together. Yeah. But
I think that's like, And I have no qualms against women who think who approach the girl boss mentality, but have not kind of bristled up against the critique of it, right? Because it is a very easy soundbite to latch into.
Absolutely.
And so I think that, and I'll say that there was probably an era of my life that I was completely involved in that. It's only through conversations and reading and understanding different perspectives, which is another key strength of women inside the space.
Totally.
And this is why I can't, there's no ill will towards any woman who's gone down this approach. And I hate that this dynamic exists online where they're pitting women against women. And like, okay, like let's get the cat, it's not helpful, doesn't take the conversation further. And it's really tapping into this like social performance of, just trying to get this aggressive sort of combative nature for clicks, for eyeballs.
And that's why I want to say it like I offer a different framework, because I don't think it's helpful to like pit. I mean, in some ways these frameworks are diametrically opposed in their commitments, like they are. But to move someone from here to there, which is so much of my work as someone who absolutely lived in this, I thought I could just achieve my way out of misogyny, and I acted that way at previous times in my life. So I don't want to sit here like saying, oh, I'm perfect or I have it all figured out.
Yeah.
It's
because it's a hard systemic problem.
Totally, but I've done some reading and maybe I can offer that to you. But what I can also genuinely say is that this kind of intersectional framework, what we're kind of cheekily calling like babes AI adoption, it is more generative. It is, for me, created more answers and solutions, and a lot of those come into leaning into the complexity and working together. And Australia, I think, has some really amazing like potential here. Like, I know one of our themes is like we punch above our weight. In terms of tech, and I want to get to that, but I wonder if, because one of the things that I put out, and I know this is a bit spicy, but like for Reese Witherspoon or other folks with the platform, and I put myself in that bucket, even though my platform is like. Is like, I do think for those of us with a platform or who people listen to, so maybe it's in your group of 5, I think there is an ethical obligation to be open about the challenges you're working through. I don't think you should ever present yourself as, I know all the answers, but where I get really frustrated and I need to work on my own judginess is like, I'm like, oh, people really trust you and you're only talking about the technical adoption and productivity side of it. And I'm not anti that because I think people need those skills and I appreciate that people are doing that teaching, but also just saying, this is an ethical issue I'm working through, or this is something that's troubling me right now, like it's something you could Google. To me, I do think for people with more influence, there is an obligation to hold both.
But, and I'm just going to be a slight, the thing is that the discourse doesn't allow for these deep, complex moments. And I think that the Reese Witherspoon conversation got there. It just needed time to come into fruition, right? Because ultimately she put this thing out, and whether or not it was purposeful or whatever, I doubt it was, but I'm just going to assume positive intent. She's put something out, but through that discourse has actually changed the conversation considerably, has gone back and said that I'm reviewing what, she came back and said, I'm reviewing my approach. And of course that wasn't what I wasn't trying to mean this. And then it at multiple points, maybe it felt like a bit of a PR kind of tamp down, but it was actually really productive to get normal women talking about when and why they use AI and why that is different from the conversations that are happening amongst big tech. And I think that your point on like community-based AI and how that can support inside care and like this, the more women are part of the solution building inside AI, and I want to be completely clear, we know the difference between just large language model generative AI usage and then what is the potential of these tools to solve massive problems.
There's so much that isn't Claude. And the frontier labs kind of suck up all the money and airspace. But yeah, I think that's it. And I do agree. I actually don't think it matters whether, I'm sure her PR team helped her with that response, but I actually want to name that how much I appreciated that she came back and she didn't say, here's the answer, done. Her response was basically like, whoa, this blew up. I'm going to go think about it. Yeah. And to me, that is the obligation to folks with the platform.
So she got there in the end.
She did. And
it's also having forgiveness for when you do something wrong or when you get something incorrect and that's part of reckoning with this moment as well. And so I think that having a bit of forgiveness for other people if they mess up along that journey is an important skill to have.
100%.
Like there's obviously a very big difference between the multi-billion-dollar machine and how that's echoing, but then like if someone gets a citation wrong and then like what does that mean, and like, oh my god, I can't believe it's exposed that somebody was using AI. It's like, give people a break. Of course people are using AI. I hate, like that's one of my absolute pet hates is how many times people comment on my TikTok scripts and go like, oh, you definitely got like, oh, just written by a bot. I'm like, one, it isn't, but cool, but sure. But two, like, of course I use AI in what I do. I work at an ethical AI,
right.
It's totally ridiculous to think I wouldn't be using AI. And we really just need to be like, this is the tools that we have, the same way that like, okay, if you had messy handwriting or, these are different skills and tools that we need to develop.
And obviously, for me, like, I'm interested in the use of AI as like a innovative potential for disability. And so like, that's really cool that like folks would have the agency to build the thing that they need that isn't otherwise available to them for accessible costs. Like there's so much cool stuff. But to your point about repair, I think there's an underlying thing going back to kind of the white versus intersectional feminism is that white feminism also tends to have a lot of kind of binary thinking in it. And I think to your point about forgiveness and grace and what I've learned about repair and transformation and kind of transformative justice comes from feminism scholars, so Black feminism, Latina feminism. And it's this idea of like, we're not good or bad people. I find that dichotomy really unhelpful, is that we probably all are doing our best to do good and fail at it sometimes, or at least that is the only label that would correctly apply to me. And so part of building up these skills is actually learning to have reparative discourse to say, hey, what are the ways, like you'll find with me, for example, like there was someone I really respect that said something that was really offensive online the other day. I know that she cares. And so I messaged her privately and I was like, hey, by the way, this phrase means this thing. And I don't think you knew that.
Yeah.
And she didn't come back to me for a couple hours, but then she came back and was like, oh, I just deleted it and freaked out. Thanks for telling me. And I was like, yeah, no worries. I'm not going to call you out because that's going to cause a firestorm that distracts from that. And people have done that to me.
Yeah.
Fairly.
Yeah.
Sometimes publicly, which is hard, but fine. But like I say, that is, it's about not flattening people into good or bad, but saying like, hey, I have a relationship with you. I'm going to nudge you to be the person I think you want to be. And then be like, is there wisdom in this feedback that I could like take in? And that's a skill that I think like internet culture does not create space for.
I tell you what I actually think, and a bit of a throwback to what we were doing a few weeks ago, which was, I think a person that really shaped that sort of level of forgiveness and complexity in inhabiting this space is actually Roxane Gay in Bad Feminist. You know, when you actually are reading her books, I would definitely recommend, if anyone hasn't read her books, to give Bad Feminist, Hunger. They're such good books, and not necessarily dry, esoteric kind of book. It's all beautiful, just prose and wandering, but exploring things with levity and joy. But then, like in comparison, I think it just gives you this really well-rounded view of how the world can look if you actually open up to less binary thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's, I guess the big thing for me is like there is a binary between white feminism and intersect. It's not compatible.
Yeah.
But I think what often gets painted is like, oh, women's empowerment is not compatible with this. And I actually would argue, having really adopted these frameworks myself, that we actually get more to individually empowering women by thinking about women more as a collective and working across lines of difference. The other thing that I think comes up from the other side, so more kind of like leftist spaces, I was chatting to someone who's kind of has a lot of exposure to leftism, and they were saying like on the right, as long as you say you're on the team, they let you do it. And I think in more progressive spaces, we sometimes have these like completely unachievable purity tests for who we're willing to work with. And I will admit, like, I'm probably the more dogmatic and rigid of the two of us.
Yeah.
Like,
but that's fine.
I'm aware.
I love you for it.
I'm aware. But even I can find deep frustration where, like, I think there's just so many problems we're trying to solve with AI that the more constructive approach is like, you know what, there's a Venn diagram between a bunch of us circling around the same problems. Let's focus on the Venn diagram in the middle first. We can discuss our differences later. And I was really influenced by Tarana Burke, who talked about this a lot. She's like, it's really exhausting. Like, to do something at the scale we want to do, we have to accept that there's going to be differences of opinion in our coalition. Mm-hmm. And how do we humanize people even when we really disagree with their perspective? And that is a part of something I'm like actively working on. At the 40% we agree on, we could do rad shit if we did it together.
Yeah. Have you ever read John Ronson's So You've Been Publicly Shamed?
No, but I'm obviously going to put it in the show notes and read it.
Because I feel like that is actually, I feel like I was definitely in kind of a more rigid space. Mm-hmm. And then I read that book and it really opened my eyes to the level of how the internet has become the public forum for shame. and how damaging that really is to people through that process. And so when you kind of doing those, like, and this is where I really got assume positive intent as this like war cry for me, is that like, I know that from my perspective, I would never do something trying to purposefully hurt someone. And I assume that most people
I think it's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's how I operate.
Yeah, but you know, you go through that process, and I think that these are the systems that are in play to make people feel at combat with each other. So, like, I'm actually really keen. Sorry, and that was just a slight digression.
But I
keen
think
to hear what you like do in terms of how do you actually approach AI in a way that you consider these aspects and interrogate and create like ethical frameworks about usage.
So because I've made a principled choice to like work as an AI ethicist or an AI governance, professional, that's what I do most of the time now, is I don't feel like I can assist others if I'm not playing with the frontier technology. But the IP theft rights, the like horrible labor exploitation of folks in the training economy, the environmental issues like sit on me really heavily. So the way I have kind of three things that I've committed to that I'm saying I'm figuring out, and I'm saying it publicly before I've done it, to try to show my thinking, not to be like, you have to do what I do. Number one is I'm working on building a little tool that helps give at least a estimate of the marginal environmental impact of the inference costs of me running my own systems. There's a paper that I'm relying on that we can link to that came from a team in Seattle that's probably the best published, I think it's a preprint I'm aware of, around the full life cycle cost of carbon and water with AI. I'm setting aside money in my business every month to try to purchase carbon removals at the end of the year equivalent to that. I'm looking for organizations that are doing advocacy for creators and data workers to try to put money into that economy within the scope of, I have a very tiny business, so I'm doing what I can. But then the third thing, and I have kind of a 5-phase AI adoption framework that I use with SMBs, but I'm going to add a phase 6 into, phase 4 looks at kind of consolidation and risk assessment across a post and experimentation phase. And I actually want level 6, part of the risk assessment, to include which of these current workflows could be done with local AI. So I plan to move my workflow from experimenting and building with frontier, where I don't know the power of the model I need, but then when I look at my workflows critically to say, how could I use a local, potentially quantized model to do this and have a process for moving things from like Claude Cowork over to my own servers. Now, understand, I don't have the technical skills to do that right now, but I'm basically just saying it out loud and talking to engineers I know
into the universe.
Who, like, I have an engineering friend who wants dating advice, and he's gonna train me on the command line in exchange. And so I offer that as, this is how I'm trying to resolve that. And like community, like I literally just told a guy friend who is like an ex-coworker that I really wanted to do this. He's like, oh, I'm an engineer, I can help you with that. Can you help me with this personal thing? And that's the community-based framework I'm saying, is that like, I don't know how to do a thing, but someone I know does. And so that's it.
Yeah, and that's.
But I don't know. Is that amazing?
No, well, no. I think, but like these are all steps that people are taking, and I think that's like, I think that for the same, like we kind of inside our organisation, when we were, this is exactly the reason why we had recently launched Selma, because we were seeing that the frontier models were, embedding either biases, like what are the systems? So we kept on creating these guardrails and, creating these catch-alls to be like, okay, when you're seeing something, when you're seeing this pattern, let's set it inside the process that if you're making automated or agentic decisions, that let's do trend analysis at the end of every week and see whether or not there's any patterns inside that data, like all that type of stuff when we're working with organizations. But this is where the value of small language models comes in, because you're not getting this like massive swatch of just, unnecessary data as part of that inference. And so you can actually make them far more refined, far more ecologically sustainable, and hopefully over time continue to compress until we've actually got some level of carbon neutral AI. Because realistically, not everyone needs the Ferrari to do like a spreadsheet. Like they just don't need that power. And there's still a place for frontier AI. Sure,
no, I think there is, but I think it's a smaller part of the market. And yeah, the Ferrari, it's so funny. I was telling someone that like for probably at least 40% of what people are doing in AI, like using Opus to do that is like taking a Ferrari to go get milk at Aldi.
Yeah.
Like,
I literally was having this conversation because the other day when Anthropic was having those outages, Haiku came back online and Opus came back online, but I had some things in Sonnet, and I was talking to deaf friends and like, what loser you uses Sonnet? And I'm like, well, I don't need Opus for this.
Totally.
And like, it's totally unrequired to have it. So I've set up those flows to work through Sonnet. And so, yeah, I'm out for a little bit longer. It got resolved within the hour.
So that's another thing that I do, which is when I build an agentic workflow, the weekend before I actually want to start using it, I run it on Haiku. And so to me, I default to using Haiku and Claude because it is simpler. The carbon, costs are marginally lower. If it does not perform well for 2 days, then I will upgrade it to Sonnet, and then I give it 3 or 4 days, and then I upgrade it to Opus. So to me, like, you have to earn higher impact models, but that's my personal way of wrestling with it. And that's something I help clients think through, like, is that the right thing for them? Or is there a different set of processes and frameworks that they're thinking about? But that's what I offer is, like, if you're already playing with the tools, think about the ethical considerations as a part of your creativity and innovation.
Absolutely. And so this is one thing, and I'm going to throw this out. So that
are you about to be a giant nerd? I'm really excited.
A what nerd?
A giant nerd.
Oh, a giant nerd, yes.
Yes.
No, but I was actually going to say, I'll throw it out because this is actually something that we're really keen to get people who may be more involved. So
you heard it here first.
Well, something that we've been working on for a few months is setting up a knowledge attribution model.
Yeah.
So having something that as people are informing a model, that it actually is able to basically register how that knowledge is then being referred to inside the system. And so we could actually have a way to either create a pool of subscription money when you're using a product like Selma, and then be like, well, this money gets redirected to people inside the organization because, like, if they've left the organization, they've actually still got some income in perpetuity for the knowledge that they use. So we're in the process of, like, we've done the kind of thinking around it, but oh my gosh, we would love more involvement. It's like we're still in early days to make that be something, because I think that is really where it needs to go, so that we're able to go, people have an attachment to their labor as part of that.
Totally. I mean, I love that. And in some ways, it feels like a really interesting potential extension of, like, the Tim Berners-Lee, like, individual data pod idea. But it's not just the data about you, it's also your IP.
Yeah.
And together you control. Yeah, like, weird thing. Like, I can totally see a world where, like, I put my IP in a little bubble and my clients, like, partially license it, or I have an agent that, like, give, like, I think that's really interesting possibilities that, again, I don't think come out of, like, thinking about these feminisms of color, like knowledge attribution and the lineage of insight, and tracing that is a really important principle within those practices. And so I just want to point out how something that you'd be like, Aubrey, that's so esoteric. I know, but the ideas in it are actually just really pro-human. And so finding a way, even if it's just listening to us because you don't want to go read the 16 books, I think that's fine. Not everyone learns that way. But, like, that is the idea of respecting that the heritage of an idea matters. And there are cool technical possibilities of how we can honor that principle with AI. But I think it goes back to this thing of, like, to me, when I say kind of Girlboss AI, to me, that is just kind of uncritically buying into the narrative that, like, rich men in Silicon Valley are asking you to. And it doesn't create space for other options. But I think the other options don't automatically reject people using it for personal productivity. That is one of a suite of options inside it. But again, it also offers more tech that you can play with, which is just, like, cool.
And this is why, even the whole sort of hoopla around, like, well, I'm rejecting AI. Like I said, I completely respect people that do that, but this technology is moving swiftly, and all you have to do is read Invisible Women and see how the sort of nature of decisions that get made now is going to reverberate in future. So it doesn't, like, you don't actually have to be a technical person. You actually just need to be involved in the conversation so that your expertise can be brought into view. Because, like, when we work with, like, not-for-profits or, like, people are terrified of using AI. I'm like, oh, AI is just the tool, but what's actually really valuable is how this helps you in your instance, and where your judgment and what you've refined over years can be unlocked more considerably through a tool. And so I think that's the thing, is that you don't have to be a massive advocate for AI, but just understand it and get more involved in understanding what its potential is.
And I think that to me is like this kind of, I mean, I know I'm being silly, like Babes AI or whatever. It's like, hey, I see and value your lived experience. You know, folks who are doing this adoption over here are playing a role in upskilling people so that they can create things. But yeah, and I think Australia is so unique in so many ways because we have, we're a really multicultural country. So we have ideas from all over the world coming in and populating if we create the space for them. Because I do think the best ideas around kind of feminist AI are coming from the global majority, not exclusively, but you know, I think about what women like Paula Requerte is doing in Latin America is fascinating and super interesting. There's women, a lot of Indian technologists.
Have you seen Savam AI? New
brand
model.
new.
Yeah. Really interesting.
So I think kind of looking around the world at this, but Australia has a lot of really interesting infrastructure. So at ANU, there's a lot of work being done around kind of feminist foreign policy and AI governance. Mm-hmm. I don't know, like maybe you can just give some names for folks who want, like, but realize that like we're doing a lot here. But it's not necessarily what's being talked about because we're all debating the capital gains tax, like for startups.
Anyway.
I mean, sorry.
Digression on when we're saying don't talk about
children on the internet. But like, yeah, so I'm curious, like what are the kind of like feminist flavored like AI humans project things in Australia or anywhere else that's getting you excited?
I love the work by Alondra Nelson.
Okay.
She's US based, I think out of Stanford, maybe. Sorry, I've gone completely blank. But has worked significantly inside government use of AI. So looking at diplomacy use. I saw her on a panel overseas, and she was just phenomenal. But has amazing sort of think pieces regarding how to make more inclusive AI. African-American woman who has just really was part of the Biden administration in terms of setting up the AI sort of structures that were there during the Biden administration, and has since gone off and worked in, obviously not the Trump administration. Raman Chowdhury, again, I know that I've mentioned her a few times, but she has this amazing podcast called Thinking About Thinking. And the structures that she puts in play regarding how metacognition works, but it really kind of taps into what is really valuable inside different experiences. So they're kind of two that I really listen to. There's obviously a plethora of amazing women that are talking about AI in Australia. You've got Georgie Hubbard and Louise Campagnoni. You got Georgia Healy. You know, there's so much conversation happening with AI, and I think that it's really important that, you know, as women, we're all kind of seeing and supporting people inside that space, and also holding space for those conversations to happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. And going back to like one of the things for me, because I get that this is running long, is like we're dealing with such a big set of problems. It's okay for us to each have our own lane and to do things slightly differently. Like I think with you and I, like values-wise very aligned, but we do stuff in very different ways and we show up differently. And so for me, folks that I really look to kind of across the spectrum is like the whole team at DARE. So the Distributed AI Research Center, Timnit Gebru kind of founded after the Google debacle. Anyone who was involved in the Stochastic Parrots paper, so thinking about Emily Bender, who's much more on the anti-Gen AI side, I think hers is an incredibly important voice to listen to. Whether you land in her place is not my argument. It's that you should be listening and taking her really seriously. Alex Hanna at DARE, I really like. If you don't know who Joy Boylamwini is, so she leads the Algorithmic Justice League. Her book, Unmasking AI, really talks about algorithmic bias in computer vision.
Laura Bates as well.
Yep. And so like these are folks that I think if you're not aware of them, like go follow them on whatever socials you're on and just kind of passively absorb some of their ideas.
Because they're brilliant women. They're brilliant
Totally.
women raising really, valid either concerns or opportunities for AI to be embedded.
Yeah, and my push is, because there's so much of my work, especially for white women, make a really specific effort to get perspectives from women of color in your feed. If you're non-disabled, find disabled folks to follow. If you're not queer, listen to queer people. So like listen and truly consider across lines of difference.
And I think that's a really good point, because when we talk about what we do, I think that both of us groom our algorithm.
Totally.
Like that is actually
Constantly.
probably what we I would say is a massive takeaway for people to be like, you may not be able to do all the research and consider it, but the thing that you can do is control what you see and what kind of voices you what's the word?
Elevate. But I think that's it, is like you're a product of your information environment and you can't control the algorithm, but you can prune it, but just do that in the flow of your existence.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I guess the challenge I would say for folks who are listening, who maybe were a little bit more on the adoption without criticality side, is pick an issue and commit to spending 15 minutes learning about it and developing an opinion about it.
Yep.
And maybe pick a critique that you can get on board with.
Small steps.
Yeah, I think.
Love it.
And then just kind of keep doing that.
Yeah, over time.
So, I mean, that's how we ended up here.
Which side are you on? Which side are you